Our next presenter is Paul Michael. Born in Maine, raised in Texas, and now working in Connecticut, Paul is an artist who explores themes of intimacy and isolation. Michael's work was recently published in Orange Blush Zine and Get Candid magazine. Recent exhibitions include Fan Culture at the CICA Museum in South Korea, the Newport Annual at the Newport Art Museum, Being Without Being at the Alexei von Schlieffen Gallery in Avery Point, and Circuits at the Marquis Gallery in New London. He received a BFA from the Lime Academy, where he was a recipient of the Chandler Scholarship. Michael is currently an MFA candidate in studio art, graduate instructor, and a student in the Arts Leadership and Cultural Management graduate certificate program at the University of Connecticut. Please welcome Paul.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Paul Michael. I'm a video artist, a drawer, and a musician. I'd like to thank the UConn faculty, and especially my committee members, John O'Donnell, Lori Sloan, and Barry Rosenberg, for encouraging me to stay uncomfortable and honest. I'm also very grateful for the MFA grads, my cohort, along with my friends and family who've been so supportive. When I left my hometown in Texas to attend college, I had to decide what was worth taking with me based on what I could fit into my car. I stuffed an easel, a keyboard, some clothes, and a box of oil paint into the vehicle. 4 years later, as I started my graduate research at UConn, I still found myself thinking about the objects chosen. This video performance, titled Work Shoes, Gym Shoes, was created by wearing and removing 2 sets of shoes repeatedly, using this repetitive gesture to move from one side of the room to the other. A security camera capturing my actions projected a secondary image of my body as I completed the task. I was interested in the materials from my daily interactions. I considered these physical things like they were the building blocks that made up my life. Each object represented an activity, and the mental space that each activity took up is what interested me. Mika Rottenberg creates video installations where characters perform absurd tasks. They process materials, converting one thing into another. There's a sense that work needs to be done, as if you had stepped into a very busy kitchen, but the work performed is strange, unnerving, and ridiculous. Rottenberg's video titled Tropical Breeze shows 2 people in a truck. The person in the back seat uses a pulley system to transport handkerchiefs to the truck driver. The driver uses these to collect her sweat and sends them back using the pulley system. The artist describes how everything is a part of the production chain, where the product, sweat, is made as it is delivered. Matthew Barney's drawing restraint 1 consisted of an obstacle course, which the artist created for himself. Maneuvering through the studio, Barney would create performative drawings. Describing how, quote, the body requires resistance in order to grow, Barney's performances act as an analogy about life as an artist, an internal struggle to express and further develop oneself. In the contained space of my studio, I thought about my own struggle to communicate with others. Towards the end of my first year, I talked about issues of communication, of listening, and empathy, but my performances only involved myself, a feedback loop in an empty bubble. It was at this point when I started to develop projects that involved others. I shifted my focus away from materials and focused on spoken language, as if it wasn't material. This work, titled A Conversation, was created by having 2 people enter a space. Their prompt was simple: talk about anything you want with each other, but write down the words of the person you're talking to. My collaborators were handed Sharpies to write with. As they jotted down the words of the other on a large roll of paper, it became apparent that not all parts of the conversation were being recorded as they drifted between active and passive listening. The written words act as a document showing your engagement with the other person. The more attention they gave to listening, the less attention they gave to writing, and vice versa. It was very difficult to do both tasks at the same time. The performance relied on failure and the limitations of understanding another person. I continued to create performances in my studio space using this project as a guidepost for future endeavors. Using woodcut prints, an analog process, I also created images of my empty studio. These woodcuts showed the performance space waiting in anticipation for people to enter. The prints were a monochrome gray. The white of the paper showed a material that could absorb the words of the performer. A blank projector screen, a glowing laptop, or a roll of paper. Documenting the scene as if they were illustrations found in a manual, the prints pointed to an alternative communication channel. Bruce Naumann's work has haunted me for years. I recall seeing his piece, Audio Video Underground Chamber, at the MoMA exhibition, Disappearing Acts. The video shows a live stream of an empty box buried underground. Naumann gives the audience complete access to a space that asks for your attention, but has nothing to offer. Similarly, his work titled Mapping the Studio, Fat Chance John Cage, shows a 6-hour recording of the artist's empty studio. The multi-channel video is accompanied by a corresponding script, which maps out every excruciating detail: a moth flying by, a mouse scurrying across the floor. Naumann's work brings a sense of claustrophobia to the viewer, as if each installation is a stage where you're both the performer and the audience. The space where a conversation takes place matters. My video series, titled Want, was created in a contained space. I hope to make a collaborative project that could tell participants something about themselves. I traveled to various locations in Connecticut, interviewing people about what they do and do not want. I asked the people I interviewed to stay in an empty space, alone with the camera, for 2 5-minute sessions, starting each sentence with, "I don't want," until the time was up. We repeated the process again, but this time starting each sentence with, "I want." One person told me that they simultaneously felt drained and comforted by the interview process. They mentioned that saying what they didn't want reminded them of everything wrong in their life, but that spending the next 5 minutes saying what they wanted reminded them that they're doing everything in their power to fix it. Wendy Clark's video series, Love Tapes, asked thousands of participants to share what love means to them. They would enter an empty cubicle, play a song of their choice, and record a message about love for 3 minutes. The collection of 743 video cassettes shows the internal world of people as they grapple with their relationship with the word. And here's a quote by one of the anonymous interviewees. "These statements are not universal, but I think that love is very close to hate. The line is always very fine, and I always hate the one that I love. I love myself a lot, and I think I'm very beautiful, but I also hate myself a lot, and those two feelings are what rule my life." The fast-paced editing of the final videos jumped from person to person as they described their definition of the word. I find the series beautiful. In my series, the repetitive statements starting with "I want" and "I don't want" ask you as a viewer to grant their wish, forcing you to confront your own assumptions about what is okay to desire. Is it okay for a middle-aged person to want their children to be happy? Is it okay for a younger person to want to be famous? Do we judge others for what they want or for wanting something that we think is out of reach? 1 month later, when the pandemic hit the US in March 2020, I started looking at musician live streams. It was an anxious time. TikTok was gaining popularity. Gal Gadot made an atrocious video of celebrities singing Imagine. It felt like the world was burning and everyone had turned into a content creator. I thought a lot about Britney Spears. The Free Britney movement was just starting. I wondered if these public figures would seem like the same people when they were separated from the production teams and alone with their cell phone cameras, or if they'd become someone else entirely. It was at this time when I started to work on my live series. a set of drawings and videos exploring Instagram Live. I toned Stonehenge paper with gray acrylic paint, binding them together to create sketchbooks roughly the same size as an iPhone 6S. I drew drag queens, activists, artists, people who live stream their daily runs, and an endless amount of DJs. Oftentimes, the same people would log into the app, and over time, I felt like I developed a relationship with them by repeatedly drawing them, a sort of digital commute where I'd bump into the same person each Monday morning. The relationships with these people were not built on anything substantial. I didn't know most of their names. My portraits captured a glimpse of who they were at that given time, an incomplete picture. The limitations of drawing could only capture a suggestion. In life, we never fully see the people around us. Those who are closest to us envelop us with their schedules and daily routines to the point where they could become invisible. The people who are farther away, whether physically or mentally, could become shadows. Nardwuar is a Canadian musician and interviewer known for his unconventional interactions with musicians. He's known for doing extensive research and giving hand-picked records that relate to the person interviewed. His persona is goofy and disarming, creating a sense of intimacy with celebrities, as if he's known these people for years. I wanted to be just like Nardwuar, and I began to think about the people in my life that I feel like I should have a better connection with, people that I felt like I was performing around. I felt like I was an actor, playing a part, staying in touch, but as another person. I started to imagine what it could be like to be close to these people. And with this in mind, I began to watch celebrity conversations on Instagram Live, finding moments that I wish I could have been a part of. I memorized the lines of these conversations and began to reperform them, editing myself into the dialogue. This series, titled Live 02, is a collection of fake conversations. The 3-channel video contains conversations between myself, Sarah Paulson, Sierra, Russell Wilson, and Katy Perry. Teenage Dream came out 10 years ago, and that kind of threw me off guard. But what a big record it was, not to mention Firework, which I mentioned earlier. When you hear those songs, do you recognize that person? Does it feel like the same person?
Yeah, I mean, that person was a little bit more head in the clouds, fantasy land, escapism central. I would rather feel all of these feelings than just be lost in ignorance is bliss, because I think there's deeper feelings when you survive something, or when you live through something, or you live and learn, and it's not just all, a fantasy lifestyle.
Deep down, I think we all want to be seen by our idols or anyone else that seems out of reach. This work is about that distance and my own desire to pretend to have intimacy. Sometimes when I'm driving in my car, I catch myself reperforming something that I said, but this time in a more articulate manner. I mostly reperform conversations when I regret something, whether it's an argument that I found myself losing, a point I didn't get to make, or a tough conversation that didn't end well. My project, titled A Cold Read, is an echo chamber between strangers. It started with a recorded video of 2 people meeting for the first time on Zoom, making small talk, learning about each other. I transcribed their words into a script and had new pairs of people then reperform their conversation. The final video is a single conversation performed between a group of people, each person taking turns playing one of the 2 roles. Session 2 was a conversation between an artist living in Connecticut and a scientist working to do COVID testing in Austin, Texas. They talked about the people they recently lost from COVID or drug overdoses. This work is an ongoing project, each iteration of it different from the previous. The flipping roles between the actors creates a sense of bewilderment. Are these real people? Was this an event that actually happened? The interchangeable personas of these people speak to the impossibility of knowing another person, but the desire to try anyways. Now, as I prepare to leave this program, vaccinated, ready to join others and be physically present in the world again, I'm thankful for the friendships that I have and ready for whatever is next. And that concludes my presentation. I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Could you tell me again where you saw, I believe it was Bruce Naumann's work? Was it at, you said it was at the Museum of Modern Art?
It was at MoMA, yeah. It was actually a two-part show. There was one at PS1 as well, but I saw the one at MoMA. But there's also I also showed a piece that was at Dia Beacon. I
was going to say the Dia Beacon basement piece. That one I have a hard time going into. I find it very disconcerting. When I spend time in there, the physical feeling is I just want to get out of it.
Yeah, especially with the scale of it as well, so blown like beyond the proportions that you'd normally see.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see your work going at this point?
Well, at the moment, I'm in the process of continuing with this project that I've kind of been inching towards in the past few months, called it, well, I'm still thinking about a title, but I'm asking people to talk about what they're engaged in. So it's been kind of this open call on the internet, functioning somewhat similarly to the piece I was talking about earlier, where people talk about what they do and do not want. But I've really been thinking about this idea of engagement, or what does it mean to be engaged? That can be a relationship, right? It's also something that it's a term that is used a lot in academia, how engaged are students? So I'm really kind of using this as a jumping off point, asking people to talk about the activities that they're engaged with, the people, the kind of meaning that they've been able to arrive while being physically distant.
We have a question from Kelsey Miller. She writes, I'm interested in your focus on connection and relationships between people. Did you receive feedback from your participants who were strangers to one another having a scripted conversation? Did they have actual conversations with one another before or after the performances?
Yeah, you were talking with the newest project, A Cold Read. I assume, thanks for that question, Kelsey. My process changed halfway through. So the first session, the first iteration of this video, people would meet and they'd both have a script and it would be this real moment. And over time, I started to then play the other character. So it became even more separated, right? Where I would just read the other script. But yeah, for the people that did come in, they would kind of have some time before and then after, just getting to know each other. And the initial conversation itself was two people meeting.
Mm-hmm. Kristen Eshelman writes, in the project in which you place yourself in an interview with a celebrity, what part, if any, does parody or humor play in your motivation to make the project?
That's a great question. Thank you. I've been a little bit cautious with this idea of parody. I think it's embedded into it, right? This idea of like reperforming is something that we see all the time, right? I think it's part of like the language that that it is like a part of the digital world, remixing, and kind of even on TikTok, people will recreate other videos. But I wanted to find things that I actually wanted to be a part of, right? I had other iterations, many iterations of these videos that seemed a little bit sarcastic, or something just wasn't quite adding up in the way that the editing was working. So with the videos that I decided to keep, the videos that didn't get edited out, right? I was really thinking about like this idea of why should you care as a viewer? So the 3 videos that I picked are conversations about staying creative during the pandemic and kind of the way that these people have navigated that. Does that answer your question in regards to parody? I guess you can't respond, but
I was going to say, there's a big delay.
Yeah.
Did you, she mentioned parody or humor, and I think you talked about parody, but what about humor?
Well, I mean, I find parts of it funny to me. I don't know what we'll read, but especially even the part that I showed in regards to Katy Perry, where she's talking about not wanting to be in these fantasy environments, and the whole thing in and of itself, the whole video is this edited kind of fake experience. So the humor more for me is in the disconnection.
Okay. Allison Paul writes, I personally have found teaching and interacting through Zoom has removed some of my social anxieties while replacing them with a new unforeseen issues. How do you think moving to interacting through Zoom affected how you reframed your explanations around conversation and interaction?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I definitely agree and kind of echo your sentiment about Zoom. One thing specifically is the medium in and of itself, and kind of what happens with internet connections. So for instance, the piece that I showed a very brief clip of for a cold read, there's a section in the final video where one of the participants has some interference due to their internet, and they kind of freeze in place while the other person is still talking. And so that kind of using the medium of the internet, and how connections are not always going to be there, how things are not always going to come together, has been actually kind of productive for me.
Okay. Kristen Eshelman responds, yes, thanks. When you asked that question about did that answer it? Yes, you have it there. Logan Bishop writes, are you familiar with Nicholas Bourriaud, Bourriaud, and what he has to say about relational aesthetics? Do his theories tie into your thought process around making?
I'm actually not that familiar with relational aesthetics. I mean, I've heard it as a terminology. I think more in my process as like this intuitive way that I'm approaching my own relationships and my own disconnection. I'm sure there's plenty of theory that I can continue to delve into, but I try to approach it from my own like personal feelings and sentiments towards people that I wish I could have better connection with.
Okay, one last question we have here is from Olivia Baldwin. Paul, since so much of your work deals with intimacy versus distance, apart from the continuation of a cold read, quote unquote, I'm curious about how you see your work evolving or shifting through physical proximity post-pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Liv. Great question. I'm still kind of in this period where I'm dreaming up what that even looks like, you know. But I mean, the biggest shift in my work has been this acceptance or interest in this idea of, I guess, parafiction, or that kind of this combination between what is real and what is not. So I imagine that might be a new element in regards to what my work will look like once I'm back, like physically working with people.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.